Hello everyone, welcome to Love Wave Story. The moment that changed everything wasn't a text or a kiss, it was a joke I had never told. I was folding laundry when my husband laughed at his phone and casually said that she still remembered how I hate mint toothpaste. And I froze because yes, I hate mint toothpaste, but I never told her that, and I had never even met her. Let me rewind a little. About a year ago, my husband sat across from me at the kitchen table and very calmly said that his ex had reached out, that she was going through a rough time and that he wanted to be there for her. And I didn't panic or yell because I wanted to be the secure wife, the modern wife, the woman who isn't threatened by the past. So I said, okay, as long as you're honest with me. He promised, he swore. He looked me straight in the eyes and I believed him. At first it really did seem harmless, just a few messages here and there, an occasional call. He even showed me some of them, and they looked friendly, polite, almost boring, nothing that screamed danger. But then small things started happening and I noticed them one by one. She knew we were trying for a baby. She knew we argued about money last winter. She even knew that I cried alone in the car after my promotion because I felt guilty for earning more than him. When I asked how she knew all that, he brushed it off and said she was just intuitive, that she remembered how he was and how his life worked. But deep down I felt it. She wasn't remembering him. She was remembering us, our marriage, our private moments. And the worst part was that every time I asked a question I felt like the jealous one, like I was the problem, like I was ruining something I had already agreed to. So that night, when he laughed about my toothpaste, I finally asked why she knew that, and he didn't answer right away. He just locked his phone. The silence after he locked his phone felt louder than any argument we had ever had, and instead of answering me, he stood up, grabbed a glass of water, and acted like the conversation was over, like I had asked something unreasonable. And that's when I realized this wasn't just about her anymore. It was about what I was allowed to know. Later that night I lay in bed staring at the ceiling while he slept peacefully next to me, and my mind kept replaying little moments I had ignored, like how he suddenly started smiling at his phone again, how he took calls outside even when it was cold, how he became strangely protective of his screen, tilting it away from me as if by instinct. The next morning I didn't confront him, instead I did something I'm not proud of, but I think many women will understand. I checked his laptop while he was in the shower, because he never logs out of anything there. I wasn't looking for sex or love notes. I honestly didn't know what I was looking for, but what I found felt worse in a quiet way. Long emails, not flirty, not sexual, but deeply personal, conversations about regrets, about memories, about who they used to be together, and who they thought they might have been if life had gone differently. She wrote things like, "You were the only one who ever really saw me," and he replied with, "I still see you, even now," and my stomach dropped because those words didn't belong to a married man. What scared me most wasn't the past they shared. It was the present intimacy, the emotional closeness that felt alive and current, like something still breathing between them. When he came out of the shower and saw me sitting there, laptop open, he didn't yell or panic. He just sighed and said I was taking things out of context, and that calmness somehow hurt even more than anger would have. I asked him to explain the context then, because from where I was sitting it looked like he was emotionally holding hands with another woman, and he told me I was being dramatic, that this was just two people with history processing old feelings in a healthy way, and that he chose me, didn't he? So why couldn't that be enough? I wanted to scream, but instead I stayed quiet, because something inside me said that if I pushed too hard he would shut down completely, and I needed him talking, not retreating. Over the next few weeks I watched him more closely, not in a paranoid way, but in a painfully aware way, noticing how he'd light up when her name popped up on his phone, how his voice softened when he talked about her problems, how he suddenly had endless patience for her anxiety while snapping at me over dirty dishes or a late bill. Then one afternoon she crossed a line without even trying to hide it. She sent him a voice message while I was sitting right next to him, and I heard my own name come out of her mouth, calm and familiar, like she had every right to say it, and she said, "I know she gets insecure when you pull away. She always did," and my heart started pounding because that wasn't intuition. That was experience. I looked at him and asked when exactly she had known me well enough to say something like that, and he hesitated just a second too long before saying she didn't mean it that way. That hesitation told me more than his words ever could, because in that tiny pause I saw the truth. They had talked about me, about my reactions, my fears, my role in his life, and suddenly I wasn't just his wife. I was a topic in their private conversations. After that message, something shifted inside me, not anger exactly, but a cold clarity, because I realized I wasn't competing with a memory. I was standing in the middle of an active connection that had never really ended. I told him I needed boundaries, real ones, not vague promises, and I asked him to stop discussing our marriage with her, to stop sharing my emotions like they were public property, and for a moment he agreed, nodded, said I was right and that he hadn't realized how far it had gone. For a few days things felt calmer and I let myself breathe again, but then the signs came back in quieter ways, like how he started deleting messages, how he suddenly couldn't remember what they talked about when I asked, how he accused me of interrogating him when I just wanted transparency. The breaking point came when she showed up in my real life, not physically but socially, because a mutual friend casually mentioned that his ex was worried about me, worried that I seemed stressed lately. And I felt my face go hot because I had never said a word to her, yet somehow she was updated on my emotional state. That night I confronted him again and asked why she knew things even after we set boundaries, and he finally admitted that stopping completely felt cruel to him, that she relied on him emotionally, and that cutting her off made him feel like the bad guy. Hearing that hurt more than I expected, because it meant that protecting her feelings mattered more than protecting our marriage, and in that moment I started wondering if I had given him permission to slowly fall back in love with someone else. That thought stayed with me and followed me everywhere, into the shower, into my work meetings, into bed at night when he turned his back to me and fell asleep in minutes. Because I kept replaying the moment I said yes and wondering if that was the exact second I lost him. I decided to stop asking questions and start listening instead, because when people think you're no longer suspicious, they get careless, and that's exactly what happened. One evening, he forgot his phone in the car and asked me to grab it for him, and as I picked it up, a message popped up from her that simply said, "I miss the way we talk at night," and my hands started shaking because that was something he and I hadn't done in months. I didn't open it, I didn't need to. The sentence alone told me everything I had been trying not to admit, that whatever this was between them wasn't fading, it was deepening. Later, when I casually asked how she was doing, he smiled in a soft, almost nostalgic way and said she was finally feeling understood again, and that word understood hit me like a slap because it meant he was giving her something he no longer gave me. That night, I cried silently in the bathroom and felt ashamed of myself for the first time, not because I was jealous, but because I had trusted him to protect our marriage, and instead, he let someone else step inside it inch by inch. I realized then that this wasn't about catching him cheating, it was about realizing he was emotionally living part of his life somewhere else and coming home to me only with what was left. Once I accepted that truth, I stopped seeing him as confused and started seeing him as someone making choices every single day, choosing who to comfort, who to text first, who to emotionally come home to, and that realization hurt in a quiet, mature way that didn't explode but slowly crushed my chest. A few days later, he told me he was going to meet her for coffee to finally get some closure, and he said it like it was a healthy adult decision, like something I should respect. And I nodded even though my stomach dropped because closure doesn't usually need lattes and eye contact. I told myself I wouldn't stalk or spiral, but the hours passed too slowly, and when he came back he looked lighter, almost relieved, and that expression didn't belong to a man who had just closed a chapter. It belonged to someone who had reopened it and liked what he saw. He said the meeting was innocent, that they talked about the past and wished each other well. But later that night I noticed he was humming while brushing his teeth, something he only did when he was genuinely happy. And I couldn't remember the last time I had made him hum. That's when I understood that whatever happened in that cafe gave him something he had been missing, and instead of feeling guilty about it, he felt energized, and that scared me more than any confession could have. I lay next to him in the dark, realizing that I wasn't fighting an ex anymore. I was fighting the version of him that existed when he was with her, and I didn't know if love could win against nostalgia mixed with unfinished feelings. The next morning, I made a decision that felt both terrifying and necessary. I stopped pretending I was okay with any of this and told him I needed the full truth, not the edited version that made him look kind and misunderstood, but the raw truth that might hurt us both. He tried to reassure me again, saying there was nothing romantic left, that I was overthinking the coffee meeting, that I was projecting my fears onto an old connection, and I listened without interrupting until he finally said something that made everything click. He said that being with her reminded him of who he used to be before life got heavy. I asked him what he meant by heavy, and he glanced around our house, at the bills on the counter, the laundry basket, the plans for a baby we kept postponing, and suddenly I understood that she wasn't just an ex, she was an escape. That realization changed the question completely, because it wasn't about whether he loved her more than me, it was about whether he loved the life he had built with me at all. I told him I felt like a responsibility while she felt like freedom, and for the first time he didn't argue back. He just went quiet, and that silence confirmed what his words never would. In that moment, I felt something break inside me, not in a dramatic way, but in a steady, irreversible way, because I knew that even if he cut her off now, I would always wonder if he stayed because he wanted me or because leaving felt too hard. After that night, things became a strange dance between us. He would be attentive and loving one moment, and distant and distracted the next, and I started noticing every little detail, like how he remembered jokes she had made years ago, how he mentioned her opinions casually as if they were still relevant, and how he sometimes smiled at memories that I had no part in. I tried to talk to him about it, to explain that it hurt to feel like I was living with someone who carried another woman in his heart every day, and he would nod, promise to be more present, but the very next day she would message him again, needing advice or venting or just sharing something mundane, and I realized that no amount of promises could erase the bond they had, because it wasn't just friendship, it was history entwined with emotions that never really faded. One evening, I caught him laughing at a photo she had sent, a silly picture from years ago, and when I asked what was so funny, he hesitated too long before saying it reminded him of an old inside joke. And that pause was enough to make my chest tighten in a way I couldn't ignore. I started feeling trapped in my own marriage, not because of betrayal in the traditional sense, but because the emotional intimacy he shared with her was alive and breathing while I had to compete with shadows. It became clear to me that this wasn't about cheating or attraction anymore. It was about who he chose to emotionally invest in, and day by day I felt him slipping into her world while I stayed behind wondering if I had ever truly mattered. By this point, I stopped pretending I was fine. I stopped laughing at his jokes the way I used to. I stopped sharing little things about my day because I realized he was already sharing pieces of me with her, pieces he shouldn't. And I started feeling invisible in my own marriage. One night, I followed my gut and asked him directly, without anger, without shouting, "Do you still have feelings for her?" And he looked at me like I had asked him to admit a crime, and I knew in that second that he couldn't lie convincingly, because his silence stretched too long. He finally said he didn't know, that the past is complicated, that love isn't always simple, and my hands shook as I realized that our marriage wasn't just in danger from secrets or infidelity. It was in danger from the part of him that still belonged to her. I started noticing little things that I had ignored before, how he would get anxious if he hadn't spoken to her for a day, how he defended her when I even mentioned a minor flaw, how he seemed to carry her opinions in his head as if they were still shaping his choices. And that's when I understood that love isn't always about betrayal with a bang. Sometimes it's quiet, it's subtle, it's the slow drifting of a husband's heart toward someone else while you're still sitting at home trying to hold on. I realized I had given him permission to be close to her, and now that permission had become a bridge I didn't know how to burn. After weeks of sleepless nights and constant anxiety, I finally made a choice for myself. I sat him down and told him in no uncertain terms that our marriage couldn't survive as a side story to someone else's life, that I wasn't asking for control. I was asking for presence, honesty, and boundaries that actually meant something, and for the first time he didn't try to explain or justify, He just looked at me with a mix of guilt and fear that I hadn't seen before. I realized then that I couldn't change his past or the feelings that lingered, but I could demand respect in my present, and that meant drawing a line so clear even nostalgia couldn't cross it. Over the next days, we talked long and hard, painful truths, emotional confessions, and slowly, I started feeling him come back, not completely, not magically, but enough that I knew our marriage still had a fighting chance. I also learned something about myself, that trusting blindly can be dangerous, that permission has a cost, and that love sometimes means protecting yourself as fiercely as you protect your heart. So here I am, sharing this with you not because I have all the answers, but because I want you to see that love is complicated, messy, and sometimes terrifying, but you owe it to yourself to set the boundaries you need. If you liked this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, turn on the notification bell, and leave your thoughts in the comments. I really want to hear what you think and maybe help someone else who is going through something similar. Thank you for listening, and remember, love is powerful, but so is your heart.